Before we start, if you're enjoying these conversations, please make sure that you like or subscribe to Cleaning Up. It really helps other people to find us. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation. Hello, I'm Michael Liebreich, and this is Cleaning Up. My guest today is an old friend, Eamon Ryan. He's the leader of the Green Party in Ireland and minister in the current government for the Environment, Climate and Communications. And he's also Minister for Transportation. Let's bring Eamon Ryan into the conversation. So, Eamon, fantastic to see you. Welcome to Cleaning Up.
Michael, it's good to see you again.
Now, I'm going to really enjoy this episode for all sorts of reasons. One of which is that we're both in Europe and it's the evening, so we're allowed to pour ourselves a beer. Because quite often I'll be talking to somebody in the US or in Asia, and then we end up sort of drinking water or coffee. So I've got myself a little beer here, and I understand that you have you do too. Is that right?
I'm in Dublin, Michael. What would you drink in Dublin? You'd have a pint of Guinness.
I am.
But the miracles of advanced chemistry, which you'd be interested in. You pour this into this, and it turns into a pint of Guinness, which is as good as it gets, really, when it comes to beer.
Now, when we last met, you and I, you were not yet back in government. So I think if we're going to drink to anything to start this off, cheers, congratulations on being back behind the wheel.
Thank you. It'll take a minute for that to settle. This is my, I was in government back in 2007 to 2011. I was Minister for Communications, Energy and Natural Resources then. And we lost all our seats. We were coming out of the financial crash when we were in government, which was tough, but learned a lot and was privileged to serve. So then I was out of the Parliament for 5 years, worked with E3G in London on EU climate diplomacy, and then came back to the Parliament, got re-elected, and now I'm leading the party, Green Party, in a three-party coalition in government. I'm Minister for, it's a long title now, excuse me, for Environment, Climate, Communications and Transport. So it's kind of it's two former departments that, well, I'm running two departments, but they all work together. It makes sense. They're dealing with the three technological revolutions occurring at the world at the moment: the digital revolution, the clean energy revolution, and a transport revolution, which is really starting. And they're all connected, as you know. So it's a privilege, and it's full on. We're a year in now. Managing, the last time I was here was a financial crash, and now it's COVID, and so it's kind of familiar. There's a certain sense of, oh yeah, full on crisis management. But it's also a real honor and a real privilege. So I'm very glad to be here.
That's fantastic. And it's been very interesting having these conversations. I've spoken to, I'm thinking of two people that I know that you know well, Teresa Ribera, Deputy PM in Spain, and Catherine McKenna in Canada, and how different governments divide up the responsibilities to try to kind of get their arms around this very slippery transition: climate, energy, transport, and of course, digitization, telecoms. So Teresa Ribera's role is Deputy PM, and she's called the Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge. And then Catherine McKenna is Minister for Infrastructure and what was the other one? There's infrastructure and something else in her title. But you've literally got each vertical specified very clearly there.
Yeah, I work with Teresa. We're on several European councils together. Actually, I'm on 4 of them, but we work particularly on the energy and on the climate councils, the environment council together. The person I also met in just in my time in politics, you meet some people who kind of have this similar crossover. And the person I always kind of said was very much admired and saw as a great example of this sort of crossover was Ed Markey, Senator Ed Markey, when he was both a congressman and as a senator. And I thought he really got the way in which that digital revolution is is fundamental to the clean energy revolution and the transport revolution. And in turn now, the feedback, like the digital revolution is going to require clean energy more than anything else. It'll have to be 100% zero carbon like everything else. And so they cross over. And then even on the transport, it is about electrifying everything. So all three do connect. And I was very much inspired by Jeremy Rifkin, like some of his analysis about how technological change occurs and how it influences cultural change and the politics of it. I think he was also someone I kind of often thought really got this, you know, in some of his books, The Empathetic Civilization and others, he kind of got the way in which in politics we need to really understand how these revolutions are occurring and what they're affecting. And so it's I'm only learning, but I'm very glad to be in the area I'm in. I just think it's an incredibly interesting and important area for social and economic change, as well as environmental protection.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, that is what we're seeing. There is a theme there, which is what we're seeing is these kind of branches of energy, transport, climate, environment being brought together, you know, maybe not, you know, sort of, they're no longer individual and reporting to the prime minister or the premier in different countries. They're actually being brought together because you kind of need to be working all of those simultaneously, don't you, in order to actually make this transition happen?
Yeah, I think people are starting to see it, not just at ministerial level, but in Europe, the Green Deal brings it together. It's green and digital. And I see that in the UK. A lot of what Boris Johnson's administration seems to be talking about is kind of integrating them. And in Biden's administration, something similar. And actually the China, I remember years ago, I was at it was an International Energy Agency event in Paris, and it was very high end. We, Mr. Kissinger and everyone there and we were discussing whether, you know, how we would integrate China and India, which I thought was a bit, we weren't very diplomatic in the sense. They were there at dinner with us, and we were being so kind of superior, talking about whether we would have them in the club, as it were. But it was interesting, and that going right back, and this has come back to whatever it was, it's 10, 15, 12 years ago, and looking at their plan at the time. And I think actually, I remember listening to the Chinese minister quite some time ago now, and what they were talking about, the dematerialization of development, if I recall the kind of quote he was caught, or he was using for their latest 5-year plan. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, they get it. They kind of see, well, they kind of have to do it because of the scale of their population and so on. But yeah, I see various administrations around the world kind of understand this is central, and it's central now to economic strategy. Like, you know, the European Union has bet on this Green New Deal as that Fit for 55 package, which is just developed, is kind of just a legislative mechanism, but it's pretty central to economic strategy and social strategy as well. So and to greater or lesser extents, I think we can see it in a number of the major economies around the world.
Yes, indeed. As we're recording this, there's just been the first release or the first reveal for the Fit for 55 package from the EU. So that's some of the mechanics around how the EU is going to deliver this 55% reduction in emissions in 2030 vis-a-vis the 1990 baseline figure. Have you been involved in developing that? You said you're on 4 working groups. So have you, when it all goes horribly wrong, is it your fault?
Yeah, that's the great thing of having this trialogue, where we can all divide up responsibility, the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. I'm on 4 of the European Council group in transport, in digital communications, in energy and in climate. I think the councils do have a role, and I mean, it's easy. You mentioned Teresa there. Like, I think what I see, and I suppose my experience in the European Council goes back as well to the 2007, 8, 9 period, when I think there was similar sort of leadership at European Council level. I remember Connie Hildegard was on the council at the time, Jean-Louis Borloo, if people know, French minister at the time, and a number of others. And I just remember the time thinking that there was a bit of leadership there, and including from the commissioner, Peebles we had at the time, who was really good, innovative commissioner. So you can sometimes, in the likes of the European Union Council, you can actually get leadership. And I sense it's there at the moment. Frans Timmermans is the vice president with responsibility for climate. But more than that, a kind of a group of ministers, we tend to meet sometimes in advance of the main council meeting. We're kind of a team with enhanced ambition. And I see it in some of the major European economies as that there's starting to be that sense in my mind of political ambition and commitment. Now, it's not, we've a long way to go, and Europe has a lot to do, and particularly in the run up to COP in Glasgow and beyond, to start being more engaged globally in some global diplomacy showing such leadership. But I have a similar sense to what I had back in 2007, 8, 9, that in the likes of the European Council, there is now some real ambition, and the legislative package is an expression of that. Now, it's not perfect, and there'll be, it won't be the final deal. It'll be amended. But I think compared to what I see in the US, and I could be wrong, I haven't been to Washington in a while, but I'm not so sure Congress is in the same space. And I think that might give Europe a certain advantage. I think, the political leadership we might be able to show, because it's not as divisive. There is a united understanding across most of the groupings in the Parliament and in the Council that, yeah, this is our economic future. And that might just give us a wee bit of a head start.
Yeah, because it is one of the big questions pretty much for all the big blocs, whether it's China, translating from President Xi down to, how does this translate into 5-year plans, or how does this go into the provinces? In the US, you've got the Biden administration, talking a completely different game, obviously, from the Trump administration. But again, can it actually get things through, whether it's the infrastructure bill, whether it's the, any aspect of its net zero plans? And then what you're saying is you think that in the EU, it might be easier to go from the sort of rhetoric to the legislative level.
I think, now without talking out of tales, as were, our Prime Minister, our Taoiseach, Leon Martin, had a meeting with President Biden recently, and it was interesting. Apparently, he was saying afterwards, what was the conversation centered around? One of the things was centered around whether constitutional democratic republics will be best able to deliver this change, or in a world where there are other, shall we say, governance models. And I think that's a really interesting question. And it's not just a function of how committed the political system is, it's how do you bring people with you, or how does this system we have, where you've loads of checks and balances, and where you've got, well, the ultimate test, you got to get re-elected. Okay, we know what we have to do. How do we do it and still get re-elected is the kind of question. And will our democratic systems with independent legal and free press and all those institutions of liberal democracies, will they be best placed to deliver the scale and speed of transition we need, or will other governance models? And that's what the conversation between our Prime Minister and the President Biden was recently. And I think, I suppose I stand for constitutional democratic republic that we're in, and I like to think we will be able to do it. That it'll delay us in some ways, we'll make mistakes, but in some ways there'll be better corrective mechanisms to learn from those mistakes. And so we might be better at this transition we have to make.
No, I'm exactly there as well. And, it's one of the great pleasures talking to you, because, politically we ought to disagree on everything. You're, you lead the Green Party, I'm a Conservative, but I see it absolutely as critical that we don't give up on democracy because this climate challenge is so big. And there are lots of people, and lots of young people, who think that democracy is not well suited to dealing with this challenge. They like what they see out of some more authoritarian countries because they can make decisions and at least ostensibly deliver. But I certainly think that the only way to get the sustained effort and the innovation, the engagement and the innovation throughout society and across all sectors is by, it may not be easy, but it kind of forces people like you to think about, what does a just transition really mean? How do you actually take the folks who are perhaps, not, well-off urban liberals, but everybody who's really struggling to get through day by day? How do you take them on this journey? And I think you have to do that hard work. And as a result, we'll get better solutions and more creativity along the way.
Can I just reflect on one thing on that, Michael? Because as I said, in my own history and past, like was elected out of office, which is a good lesson in humility and kind of the democratic system when you're not re-elected. And back in 2012, 13, myself and a number of friends who were very involved in this climate issue, we have been, you among them over the years, and we're thinking, why are we getting our story wrong? Like, what's not working here? And so I spent a good bit of time, climategathering.org, we put up some of the material in a very creative setting when I didn't have anything else to do because I'd lost my job, as it were. But just really thinking the question, what's the story that we need to tell here to inspire people to the sort of scale and speed of actions we need to take? And it was really interesting. We did it in a very safe space where, and I just, because what you said there, just the very start of what your last comment was, you know, yourself, myself with different political views. Yeah, but fine. I mean, the definition of a liberal in my mind is that you're tolerant to the other person's view. And be that even more so if someone's from a different perspective, because when you start listening rather than kind of writing that person off and put yourself in their shoes a wee bit, or understand that they might have something bugging them that informs, you know, how they approach it. And I just mention that because I do think in the politics of climate change that we need that sort of perspective, that there needs to be not a kind of divisive perspective. And I say that for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the scale of the change is so great. And it can't be stop-start. You know, you don't want it to be one government comes in, you make capital investment, and then next government comes in, you stop it. And that would make it very expensive, very slow, very uncertain. So we need to win 5 or 6 elections in a row, in a sense, for climate, in my mind. And therefore, you come to the realization that every place matters and every person matters. You know, we need a wide consensus. We need this to be not a divisive issue politically, as best we can avoid that. Now, that then leads you to a form of politics, as I said, which is when you listen to people, you ask people for help rather than telling them what to do. You admit uncertainties, like we don't know how some of the technology is going to evolve. We've all learned over the years, like if I was to say, you know, 15, 20 years ago, EVs would go the way that they've gone, we didn't know. I mean, we had an idea, but we didn't know the battery prices were going to come down the way they did. We didn't know solar was going to come down in price the way it has. We didn't know offshore wind. You know, even 5 or 6 years ago, we weren't so clear that offshore wind was going to be so transformative in terms of its potential. But that level of admission of kind of we have to learn as we're going and learn by doing. And I think the politics of it will work best when it isn't the politics of we're the righteous ones, you're the non-progressive ones, or whatever way you want to put it. I just think that's not the politics to make this happen. It does need a truly liberal political perspective, which is respectful of other views. And I know that's so obvious, but it's kind of first base, I think, in terms of what we need to do in making this leap we need to make. And then the story that you can start to tell is a story that's more widely adapted. And it's a story that brings you to slightly different place. It's not as technocratic, it's slightly more human. It's slightly more hitting the heart, not just the head. So you'd be from a conservative tradition. I'd be from a green liberal, kind of left of centre tradition. Remember, it was Roger Scruton, that English philosopher or whatever, and his kind of thing about, we speak about home, you know, and it's a common home. And I don't see that doesn't apply. I don't see why love of the home belongs to any one political tradition.
That's probably Edmund Burke, I suspect.
Well, he's another Dubliner. He probably had a pint or two of Guinness when he was when he was working that out.
You see, I would go even further though, and I would claim primacy for my brand of politics. And the reason is, I think the centre right is the swing constituency here. I don't say primacy in terms of superiority of thought. I don't have that arrogance, but primacy in terms of a sort of acid test for what works. And the reason I say this is, here's how I segment the political spectrum. I think that you've got, you know, I don't want to call it the hard right, but the very, very libertarian right is going to just react against any intervention of any government in any way. And they're just going to be almost impossible to win over to any sort of concerted action, governmental role, etc. And there are some culture wars reasons why, there's a piece of the spectrum over there that we have to sort of almost do without. Over on the green, you call it the green liberal left. Let's call it the green left, the sort of the far end on that side. They're kind of on board because they want this problem solved, the environmental, the climate problems. They're not the problem in a sense. The challenge is, as you say, you have to keep winning elections. So you sort of have to have a 65% support level. Because if you start with 51%, you just win an election, you're 51%, you start doing this stuff, it's difficult, it's complicated, there are losers, you're very quickly going to dip below the majority and you're going to get into trouble. So you need to kind of start, it's a bit like, if you want to, as a democracy, if you want to wage a war, you better start with a 2/3 support, not just a 51% support. And you start with 65. Now, the difficult bit, as I say, is not the people on the left who want to deal with it, or the environmentalists. The difficult bit is the center right, because broadly they want to do the right thing, but they're going to require certain conditions. It has to be market, it has to work with the grain of markets. It mustn't stifle innovation. It's got to respect, individual rights and communities and families and so on. And so, I sort of feel like that's the most difficult constituency to win over. That's what I've been engaged in for the last kind of 15 years.
That's very interesting. I keep coming back to this thing about constitutional liberal democracy, because in that, ours, and we have a written constitution, the protection of rights is fundamental. And it is a fundamental cornerstone of everything we do, because it's recognizing the importance of the human being and of all of us, and inalienable rights. Now, but having said that, can I give you another perspective as to where this story will go and work? And I'm going to quote George Monbiot, the great hero of my centre-left tradition. And I, among others, have made this very simple, obvious observation. I saw him give it once at, I think, a Chatham House speech he gave somewhere once, but I'm old enough, I'm 57 now, Michael, unfortunately, to remember, to see change in the global story, political story in my lifetime. From before the time I was born, after the Second World War, the late 50s, early 60s, the story that was the common narrative was a social democratic one. And whether that was Eisenhower or Truman, or whether it was Wilson or Attlee or any of the kind of or Edward Heath, it was a common consensus that the state will protect you by providing education, health, social welfare, and other systems. And yes, there's a role for the market, but that underlying belief that those fundamental protections and rights was the job of the state, social democratic system. I'm old enough to remember, literally could almost feel a turn in the late 70s, when, for a whole variety of complex reasons, you could write several books about it, the faith in that story and that model was kind of on the wane. Rubbish was piling up in the streets of London, and in the States, I don't know, for a complex range of reasons, it was no longer credible, and elsewhere. And the story then became a market-based story. It was called literally the Washington Consensus, and everyone bought into it, including, even though Blair and Clinton and others, they did have a third way, but it was still, maybe history will be the judge in this, but it was still very much market orientated, in terms of the market will deliver a lot of those needs, or that we will manage the market and use the market to help deliver the same needs in health, education, employment, all our basic needs. Again, I sense is that, and each of those stories maybe lasted for about 30, 40 years. I think something happened in 2008, 9, 10, the financial crash, and not just because of the financial crash, but because of the underlying unsustainability, particularly ecologically, but also socially. I think that kind of market knows best story, our reliance on the market to such an extent, lost its credibility. Now, it's not sure no one's sure yet what the new story is, I think. In the last decade, since that kind of question around it, there's been a variety of often populist, sometimes autocratic, and other systems that are kind of presenting as alternative stories. I don't think any of them have really caught hold. But I think, what is the new story? I don't think, I mean, the market will have a role. The market will, innovation and independence and freedom, which is included in the constitutional freedoms we do have, are important. But I don't think it's going towards a market-orientated solution, not on its own, certainly. I think it'll be ecological, it will be networked, and it'll be, I hope it'll be a nature of sort of consensus politics around the ecological transformation we need to make, using the market in a variety of ways, but also relying on government. You do need government. Government, I mean, I can see it, you know, you need government to help design grids, telecommunications, electricity grids. You can't, market doesn't really think well in terms of what's the 40, 50-year horizon for sharing power in the way we're going to have to do. And I could think of loads of other examples, like public transport systems. Well, you know this in terms of transport to London, that, you know, is market really going to deliver a design of a metro system for a city? Probably not. You do need a central, and I could go on as examples. Now, it's not going back just to the social democratic system where market knows everything, where big government does everything. And one of the reasons is, as well, is I think it does have this third element. It does have the ecological, environmental imperative within it. And that it's a more distributed system. And go back to what I was saying at the start about Jeremy Rifkin and these digital communications and clean energy and transport revolutions. The nature of those revolutions are nodal, distributed. The nature of the power systems are less hierarchical. The nature of the communication systems are more interconnected. And that's why I think ecological, and even the nature of the transport systems that are coming, it's more place orientated, 50-minute city. It's not just more travel is good all the time. It's rethinking how that works. And I think whoever understands the nature of those distributed, more network type political systems, as well as technological developments, is the one I would say this because I'm a green. It's got a green philosophy, I guess. But I do think it is the story of our time, because if we don't make that switch, we will see such significant changes that it won't make any system manageable, really.
Oh my goodness, there is so much there to unpack. I mean, this is we're going to be here all night. We need to be careful here, because look, you've now invoked the name Jeremy Rifkin twice, and I must say I'm sort of gobsmacked at that, because I regard the guy as pretty much a buffoon. I'll be completely honest. You know, when I look at his, you know, he had this, now hydrogen is now back in vogue, and he had his you know, hydrogen economy book, and it was, and the subtitle of that book, I'm trying to remember the exact words, but it was basically the worldwide energy web. We were all going to be making our own hydrogen and using our own hydrogen, and it was going to redistribute power, and it was going to be some kind of, essentially a kind of leftist anarchist nirvana. And of course, completely laughable, as was, by the way, his other book about how the euro was going to take over as the reserve currency of the world. I mean, absurd stuff, frankly, ridiculous. And I heard him speak about thermodynamics, and it was just bafflegab. It was just talking really fast about thermodynamics. And if it took anybody in, it certainly wasn't anybody with a real background in thermodynamics. So anyway, end of.
I won't go on to your, I just say, maybe to appeal to your conservative heart. He also wrote about productivity and how that works. That stuff.
Yes, I mean, there's some, I mean, the marginal, I think he wrote about the sort of the marginal cost economy, where he's probably, I mean, I'll be honest, once again, he's probably kind of put his finger on an interesting piece of the zeitgeist and then drawn almost diametrically the wrong conclusions. But maybe I should get him onto cleaning up and he can defend himself, because this is a bit unfair.
Can I say one last thing? There's another friend we have in common, Morgan Bazilian. Morgan was. Oh,
Morgan, yes.
Morgan was Morgan is now in the Payne School of Mines in Colorado. As you know, I think he was on this. He was talking to you on one of these shows, podcasts. But Morgan was my energy advisor for those years, 2007, 8, 9, before he went on to other higher office.
Morgan brought us together. Morgan is the reason we know each other.
He did. But Morgan's office anyway was right beside my office, the ministerial office. And you get, as Minister for Energy, you get lots of people coming in looking to breach the second law of thermodynamics. And Morgan, like yourself, I think, was a physicist. And so at an early stage, he wrote the second law of thermodynamics up on the wall. Massive equation, big equation. I mean, gobbledygook to me, a commerce student. But it was a brilliant entry to the office, because if he couldn't live within the second law of thermodynamics, sorry, you're right, mate. It was It was good.
The second law of thermodynamics, my version of it is for lay people is very, very simple. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But there's also you promised to quote George Monbiot. I don't know if that the thing you then said was all a quote from him, or whether you.
It was just some idea that he expressed once about that. What's the story of our time? What's the political story?
But I mean, but that sets another hair running, because George, and again, I would love to have him on this show. He has essentially decided that capitalism, or any variant of it, whether it's Tony Blair, actually Tony Blair kicked off this season of cleaning up, whether it's the third way, or frankly the fourth way or the fifth way, George has decided that enterprise is fundamentally at odds with the environment. I'm paraphrasing here, but if you'd like to, if he wants to disagree, he's welcome to come on the show and disagree. And I think that's what's interesting about, you use this word liberal. You said green left. Okay, yes, you're green. Yes, you're left. But you also use the word liberals. Now, in Switzerland, where I am at the moment, there's a green liberal party, right? You lead what is a fairly liberal Green Party. But the UK Green Party is a hard left Trotskyite party, if you actually look at its policies. And around the world, there are these different sort of shades of Green Party, from ones that I can say, well, broadly speaking, we're within the same, political fabric. And, you and I can have fabulous discussions. We would easily work together in government or in business or anywhere. But there are some folks who are hardline, degrowth, anti-capitalist. And I would say that's almost more important to them. The crushing of capitalism seems to be more important to some of them than actually improving the environment or solving climate change.
I don't agree. I wouldn't. But the Green political philosophy started all over the world at the same time, roughly in the late 70s, early 80s. It found its political form. It existed prior to that in a variety of formats, but it came out of the anti-war, feminist, gay rights movements. There are our parents, as it were. But it did find form, and I had very interesting. Christine Milne is one of the founders of the Tasmanian Green Party, which was one of the first, it was probably the first Green Party. And I met her recently, and we were chatting, and we agreed, I think, some of the roots, and I think all our Green parties share these common roots, were on four principles of, well, first it's recognizing the scale and the urgency and the imperative of addressing the ecological crisis, biodiversity as well as climate and pollution. And that is a core central principle in terms that informs our politics. Secondly, though, that it's recognizing that social justice and ecological justice have to go hand in hand. And yes, that is changing the entire capitalist system, is our view. Thirdly, though, that it is pacifist. It comes from that C&D movement, as I said. It comes from and I think pacifism, in my mind, in the world of politics, extends to what I was saying earlier about how you respect the other person. How we don't engage in this sort of derogatory politics or dismissing the other as best we can. We're all, don't always achieve that, but as a principle, I think that is where a lot of green politics comes from. And then lastly, that it actually does believe in democratic, it trusts people, it believes in decision-making at the lowest effective level, it believes in participation, it believes in democratic institutions and systems. So that's where we come from, I think. Those core principles, and it's very interesting, I had the great privilege of meeting Petra Kelly. I'm long enough involved with the Greens. The Tasmanian Greens influenced Sydney, where it was very true on protection of local environment, and they had planned, or they've campaigns there in the 70s, early 80s, where they're wearing green bands to protest for protecting local parks. Petra Kelly happened to be there, and she came back to Germany with this idea. We call it the Green Party rather than the Ecological Party, which is where we had started. A lot of our parties were called ecological parties first. And that name kind of stuck and spread and so on. And I see our English and Welsh and Scottish and colleagues having the same roots. And it's a common philosophy, and it exists in every country, in developing and developed, in emerging and small island states and others. It is a distinct political philosophy. And I don't think, and I think those four principles in my mind are sort of the four cornerstones of where we stand.
And I think where I would diverge, first of all, I would challenge the extent to which those four principles are really adhered to throughout all of the different green parties around the world. But that's by the by. I think where I would diverge is around the centrality of innovation and enterprise. I mean, the climate challenge is so substantial that there is not a single area of human activity, human economic activity, but even personal activity, that is going to remain unchanged. If you really believe net zero, then first of all, everything has to change. It's like De Lampedusa, the great, from Il Gatto Pardo, the quotation from The Leopard. For things to remain the same, everything has to change. And really everything, transportation systems, digital, every piece of infrastructure, energy, food systems, where we go on holiday, how we get there, everything has to change. And that level of innovation doesn't spring from small cooperatives, let's put it that way. We have a system which is incredibly good at delivering innovation, and it is a mesh of R&D paid for perhaps centrally by government, but all of the application, all of the service, the high quality products and services that get to market. The best machine known to the best machine in the universe, I can't prove that, but the best machine on the planet for delivering that is enterprise and business. And so then you've got these, your four principles, which all sound marvelous, and they're definitely attractive, but they don't deliver massive technological and system innovation, do they?
I'm going to throw the kitchen sink at this now, and you're opening up all sorts of big ideas, but this is an important cornerstone of the story that I think, of my story. I'm a businessman. I was an entrepreneur before I went into politics. I set up 2 or 3 businesses. I have an instinctive entrepreneurial itch, actually, that I can hardly stop scratching. I studied commerce in UCD and in Dublin. I always remember the first class in economics, the first year, the question was, what's the first assumption? People are profit maximizers. And I remember thinking, so the micro decision, every decision is around this profit maximization. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm slightly think more and bigger than that. I'll give you another inspiration. And this is personal for me, but it brings you beyond that as the instinct towards what drives innovation or enterprise and so on. For me, Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical, is a huge inspiration. It reflects my, I suppose, personal perspective on the world. And I cite it because it's willing to speak about love of our common home, and almost a love of the awareness and consciousness of where we are and what is threatened, and the need to protect it. And yes, you have to make a profit if you're in a business to survive. And yes, business and economic systems are very efficient at creating, and markets are very efficient at creating the structures by which you can develop new services and products and so on. But actually, I think in that Laudato Si way, the love of creation and the care for it, and in community and the environmental, come back to us, said it has to be connected to humankind. It's not just a love of, we are within nature. We're not separate to nature. And it's almost that philosophical, or you could say spiritual connection with nature and us within nature is what I think can inspire a lot now of what needs to be done. Market systems and business systems, economic systems can help regulate that or serve it. But I do think, I go back to that 19-year-old young man, boy, almost in that class studying economics. I kind of thought, no, it's bigger than this. There's more than this. And I agree with Kate Rayworth on that. I think her book on economics is really good in fundamentally challenging the education system and the narrow concept of economics that has been told to date. Economics is management of the home, and it starts with love of the home, and being willing to think in that sort of way, I think changes how economics will work for the better.
So Kate Rayworth's another person I must get on this show. I mean, this is the donut economics. She does a brilliant job, I thought, of listing or explaining the different types of activity, the types of value that are created that are not captured in the current economy. So carers in the home, the value of society and so on. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. The problem I have with the donut is it basically says, we don't trash the planet and don't leave anybody behind. And it gives absolutely zero information on what to do in between. Absolutely zero. If you talk about quality of education, or if you talk about healthcare for middle-class people who are not dying in childbirth or from infectious diseases, it's basically silent. And so I think it's deeply flawed.
I suppose that's where politics comes in. Politics is the poor mugginses who have to form, in effect, a cabinet is akin to a jury. It's our system of pulling together by democratic choice people who try and answer some of those questions. And it's not just politics. Judicial systems, media systems, or various, come back to this conversation we're having about will liberal modern democracies. There are various structures in society that have to work together to try and answer that question. Academia is another one. Civil society is another one, like the NGO sector and so on. There are various sectors in our society that set themselves up to try and deliver that more technocratic kind of response to, so what are we actually going to do? How are we actually going to deliver the systems we need, the power systems, the food systems, the transport systems, the social welfare systems we need? And that's, so that my meeting, I'm in their meetings today, every day, is in answering those some of those technocratic questions. Right. How are we actually going to do it?
And I mean, to me, this is the best articulation of why democracies are absolutely the right vehicle to deal with these problems, right? Because within the democracy, you'll have a bunch of people stridently arguing for protection of the environment or climate action. And you'll also have a bunch of people stridently arguing for data protection and the rights of the individual. And then you have a bunch of people who are trying to bring this all together. I think that's fantastic. I've got to be completely honest. I cannot imagine a better system than that. It's not the fastest, but my goodness, it's the most comprehensive.
It's similar to a jury system. Like, you wonder, why would you trust 12 random people picked out? Now they're random, they're selected by random nature, but it's similar in a way. And goes back to what I said, one of those 4 principles that I see in green politics. It is trust in people. It's trust in people to select who they want to be in that room, in that cabinet room, deciding. And it's not that you decide everything, but you are given certain responsibility to make certain decisions in COVID or in, everything. And I tend to agree with you. I have faith in the common, warts and all, mistakes will be made. And the great benefit is, if they really are made and if they're hopeless at it, you can kick them out.
Right. So there's a sort of self-correcting. There's, I think, Professor David Deutsch talks about the self-correcting capacity of democracies. I must say, as a guide going forwards, I do prefer Laudato Si to donut economics. The Laudato Si was marvelous because I learned how to say renewable energy and even power storage in Latin.
What is it in Latin? I don't know that.
I can't remember what it is now, but I was fascinated. I just want to change gear very slightly because I don't want to run out of time. I want to talk about COP26 and maybe come down a little bit to earth here from the Laudato Si realms and the philosophical realms that we've been in. Talk about COP26. We've got what is it now? About 4 months, 3 or 4 months left. How does it look? Are you optimistic? Is everything remaining still to be done? What are you looking for? What's a good outcome? What is your sense?
I know more next week, Michael. We're meeting, we have a European Council meeting next week. Mr. Sharma, the UK president of the COP, is going to present to us and share his and the UK government's thinking. I'll be honest, I don't think here we are in mid-July in 2021. I'd have to say it's not looking great at the moment. We need to really scale up ambition and action. It's not quite the same environment that I felt since going into Paris 2015. And I think a lot of it is around international diplomacy, and it's mixed up with the whole vaccine diplomacy. So, the justice issue around the developing world versus the developed and how we treat each other is connected to this. It's also connected to what's going on with China, US, Europe. There's that big geopolitical kind of issues at play. So it's not optimal at the moment.
Let me push you on that, because I look at it and I say, the genius of Paris, and we had Christiana Figueres also came on this show, and she talked about that ratchet mechanism. Every 5 years you ratchet. So surely we don't have to have all answers to everything coming out of COP26 in Glasgow. What we need to have is a ratchet that is significantly tighter, significantly more ambition than we had in 2015 in Paris. And with all of these countries pledging net zero and then delivering their nationally determined contributions to back that up, isn't that enough to just kind of declare victory for Glasgow?
I think you're right about the strength of the Paris Climate Agreement. Remember when in Paris, when it was delivered, I remember one of our own Irish negotiators saying, as long as it's not shortened, it's a legal text, a structure for that ratcheting as much as anything else. And it's a really good text. Christina and others deserve huge credit. But, and there are certain, things have advanced a lot. Unfortunately, carbon in the atmosphere has advanced. The understanding of the benefit of that, trying to keep below 1.5, and the urgency of that has advanced. There has been, a significant step up in ambition in a variety of different countries. Others would argue, Kevin Anderson and others, that it's nowhere near sufficiently ambitious enough. Greta Thunberg would argue correctly, but it's certainly way more advanced than anything I can remember in terms of ambition. So that ratcheting is occurring. But is it actually delivering the emissions reductions on the scale or speed we need yet? I don't think so. And is there the political diplomatic environment where we can come out? And it's not just Glasgow, it's going on to the next, I think African COP is the one after, particularly in areas like land use, fossil methane, a whole variety of different areas where I'd be particularly interested in. Is there a sense of international cooperation and delivery of new protocols to really double down on what's in the Paris Climate Agreement? And I'm just slightly nervous, not yet. It's not impossible. I think a lot of it will be around like the likes of the European Union helping create that environment, working with the UK presidency, Italian presidency. So it's not an impossible situation we're in, but it's just, it needs a fair bit of work. And my sense is that the diplomatic environment is not where it needs to be. And that can and could change and should change the next 3 months, but it's not certain.
I suppose, we may be holding it to different standards, because, certainly Paris was all about 2 degrees. And then there was this incredible sort of bonus where the wording was to get as close, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was to get to 1.5 degrees if possible, to work towards 1.5 degrees of warming if possible. And I suppose I've given up on 1.5 degrees, if I'm completely honest, emotionally. I think that we're at 1.1, 1.2. You look at the lags in the system. I look at it as an economist. I look at it as a political scientist. I think that we've blown through 1.5 degrees. If we're going to get there, it's by sucking carbon out of the atmosphere in the second half of the century. It's not going to be by mitigation actions in the next few decades. So I'm still kind of being quite I'm a Paris fundamentalist, looking at 2 degrees. And I think going in, coming out of Paris, the commitments and the action and the trends were about 3 degrees. And since then, I've seen more technological developments, and I've seen a tightening of ambitions and net zero pledges, which are only pledges right now. So I'm looking at it going, well, we're probably going to be, if I had to, give one number right now, I would say we're probably on track for about 2.5 degrees with some uncertainties, etc. But, that's a win compared to Paris, and it's going in the right direction. So why are you so, and it may be that maybe that you're really committed to the 1.5 degrees. Maybe you're the real fundamentalist going for 1.5 degrees, and inevitably you're going to be disappointed because we're not going to deliver that. We're never going to get there.
Yeah, I am that. I come from a green perspective, and I think 2 or 3 things. One of the success in Paris, I think, because the smaller island nations, less developed countries came with this, they were the ones who really pushed the getting to 1.5 degrees in Paris and got it into the text. And actually, the science backed them up in a sense. That later 2018 IPCC study showing that actually that's the right thing to do. We do need that scale of ambition. The risk of those tipping points, which we'll only know we've crossed when we've crossed, is real, and therefore caution and staying below that, or giving us a percentage chance of staying below that tipping points being crossed, is an absolutely appropriate approach. Now, what's also true you said there, and I think has come back to what we said earlier on, that none of us expected the reduction in price of solar energy to occur at the space it has, or I could pick a whole number of other technological changes. And want to come back as well, some of that work we did around when I was, that period in the middle part of the last decade, when we were thinking about what's the story here. One of the kind of simple truths that we came to in that climategathering.org thinking was that if we're going to stop going from unsustainable A to unsustainable B, you have to have a better alternative C. It has to be a better economy. It has to be more productive. It has to be more efficient. It has to be better results. And whatever about the issue about, okay, how quickly or can we reduce the emissions and so on, or can we stay below 1.5 or get to it? What gives me certain hope is increasingly when I look at the energy system, transport system, and communications digital systems that I tend to work in, is that this going green, and particularly using the nature-based solutions that improve your local environment, improve that sense of place, that Laudato Si sense of what's my place like. The increasing understanding that this going green, that the actions that you take which would bring mitigation, it isn't just for the sake of mitigation. It is actually for the sake of improving your place. It's for the sake of a better economy, that this is actually going to be a better system. And I think that might give us some acceleration. If the understanding of that and the delivery of that better economy can be really demonstrably shown and understood. And I think that is increasing it's not just, why is Europe going for a Green Deal? Well, it's not just because it's good for the climate. It's a realization, well, we can't rely on a world where we import all the materials and then maintain our wealth. We will actually be a better economy. And it's the same for China or America or Africa. This is a better system. And that gives me some hope that we might be able to achieve targets.
But, no pressure. But to a certain extent, we've heard it all before, right? Because we heard the Lisbon agenda, which was Europe was going to be the most dynamic digital economy in the world by 2010. That was set in the year 2000. By 2005, it was absolutely clear that it wasn't happening. And then we saw what I would call the kind of wave one, and you could almost call it the sort of the Connie Hedegaard leadership wave of European leadership, with Germany splurging, hundreds of billions of euros, tens of billions per year on very high cost solutions, which ended up with it, and funnily enough, it was the UK with its kind of haphazard approach that ended up leading the G20. I mean, don't you need to deliver real manifest kind of results leadership, not rhetorical leadership, not legislative leadership, but results in terms of, better lives, lower emissions, better air quality, et cetera, for citizens, either across Europe or at least in some large countries. And isn't that the only thing that's really going to then get the Chinas, the Indias, the Indonesias, the Malaysias, the, et cetera of the world to say, that's what we want to do?
It's true. And I would say it's interesting if you look at, and I'm not coming from very much from a Green Party perspective. If I look at my other sister Green parties who are doing well at the moment in Germany or in Belgium or in various countries, still, we're not the majority, but we're growing. And if you look at what's the cornerstone of what's the foundation of that success, I think it has to be shown in that we will deliver practical solutions that improve your daily quality of life and security. And I think that is happening. That there are people, in terms of when we create a better local environment for active travel, let's say, or when we're part of delivering housing solutions that are really good planning and create this sense of beautiful place to live in, or when we do create new economies that gives well-paid, just transition type employment, that is the only path to political success. Not the only path to political success, but that's the best path to political success. Now, who will be good at this and who will deliver it? We'll have to wait and see. But I don't disagree with you that it has to be rooted in people's lived experience. It can't be just a promise of something. It has to be the delivery of that. And it's not, they will deliver it for themselves. It's not like it does have a participative element to it. So that's, I think, where a lot of green politics is at the moment, is delivering practical changes that improve people's quality of life. And in the process, we address the wider climate and biodiversity crisis.
Well, that's a great answer. And I think that, we will be watching carefully, because certainly the experience so far, where there have been green councils in the UK or around the world, it's not obvious. And what we see, the danger is that every time it doesn't work, it's like, but we weren't green enough, and we have to double down and be even more participative, even more community meetings, even more place-based, blah blah blah. But not, and actually, meanwhile, I'll be honest, some of the best run councils in the UK are actually the Conservative run ones. So that's my party political broadcast. Since you're promoting the Greens, I'm going to push back.
I can't help it.
No, it's your job. It's not my job.
Occupational hazard.
We're running out of time, and I got one other topic which I do want to raise. It's a very important one. It's a very serious one. What should we've both agreed that democracies are the best hope and the best way to deal with this, not authoritarian regimes. But we do have a challenge, a very specific challenge in this climate transition, which is, what should our response be to an increasingly authoritarian China? Because there are sort of three strategies that we have to deploy. We have to cooperate. We have to compete, because otherwise, we're going to lose the jobs and the value that in our economies. But do we not also have to confront where there are really egregious human rights issues? How do we square that circle?
Oh, Michael, you're asking hard questions. That's a good question. I think we stand up for international organizations. I mean, Ireland we're a very small country in the world. We're on the Security Council now. We were there elected by other small countries. And maybe I don't want to cop out or be cowardly in it, but that's where rules-based systems where you try and reach cooperation is where we do it. I'm just slightly nervous, while I can raise all sorts of concerns, but I'm slightly nervous if go back to that fundamental point I made about the nature of politics. If I'm to depict the other in a way that you're the bad guy, we're the good guys, it slightly leaves me concerned. And yes, we need security, and yes, we need to stand up for the rule of law and rights in the human rights, the UN Charter of Human Rights, the European Union Charter of Human Rights, I think that's where I would go to answer that question in terms of, but do it in a way where it's still diplomatic and respectful for others. I just think I'm just slightly nervous of this. We're the goodies, they're the baddies. And there are other colleagues of mine who have increasing concerns in this regard. And so I'm not heedful to those, but my instinct, and maybe it's my character, it's my own personal perspective, is I would prefer to use international legal systems to address concerns I have rather than going beyond that.
No, and I think it was a slightly unfair answer, given how, we've had this lovely informal chat with a nice Guinness at your end and a beer at my end.
I'm conscious I'm speaking after a pint of Guinness as well.
But I think that's absolutely right. We have to, the starting position has to be respect, and then we can work from there I would probably, from my political tradition, I would say with our allies, rather than necessarily with international institutions, which in some cases have failed badly. But there are no easy answers. That's for absolutely sure.
No, and what we do, listen, we come from our constitutional tradition is based on a very, very closely connected to US constitutional, which is in turn influenced by UK, and not to mention our own connections with here I am in government buildings, which was built by the UK, built by the English before we gained back our independence. But in that, we also inherited a UK civil service, and all these systems I talk about, rule of law, independence of judiciary, independence of media. So in truth, that's our tradition. We have an Irish twist to it. I'm proud of our own twist. I think we've been one of the most stable democratic constitutional republics, and it is a republic. I suppose that's right. That's where the tradition I come from. Every citizen is equal in absolutely in our constitutional tradition, but it's one that, because maybe we are slightly small and not just small, but it was always an international tradition as well. And we weren't colonized. And that does change somewhat how you see the world. We come from a slightly different, I think, a slightly strange perspective because of that history and tradition, and that's one I'm comfortable
with. There's no doubt that all eyes are on Europe at the moment with the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package and its kind of high ambition. And there's no doubt that within the EU, Ireland is a fantastic sort of test case, and in a way the size is perfect because you can be nimble, you've got the creativity, you've got lots of advantages there. So definitely one to watch. We are pretty much out of time,
Nice.
Which I think is good news. And I'll tell you why. Because first of all, it leaves us lots of things to talk about over when both of us can be drinking Guinness or a nice lager here in Switzerland if you get out here, or to London. And also, it's good news because we managed to get through the whole conversation without talking about Brexit, which has to be a plus.
It is.
So I'd like to thank you for your time and for your good spirit in opening up all of these conversations, so many and of such great interest. I'm sure that our audience will have absolutely loved it.
Michael, I look forward to seeing you in person. God bless and look after yourself.
Likewise, and hopefully if we don't meet before COP26 in Glasgow, we will meet there. I've got a few plans and I'd like to involve you in them.
Definitely, Michael.
Very good.
Thanks indeed.
So that was Eamon Ryan, leader of the Irish Green Party, Minister in the current government for Environment, Climate and Communications, as well as Transport Minister. My guest next week on Cleaning Up is Laurence Tubiana. She's the CEO of the European Climate Foundation. And in the run-up to the Paris Agreements, she was France's special ambassador on climate change and a representative to those talks, of which she was one of the key architects. Please join me at this time next week for a conversation with Laurence Tubiana.